On behalf of the Tamer Institute for Social Enterprise and Climate Change, the Bernstein Center for Leadership and Ethics, and the Columbia Center for Justice, I want to warmly welcome you to tonight's screening of the Alabama Solution. My name is Misan. Thank you. My name is Misan, and I'm an MBA student here at Columbia Business School. I'm also part of the Student Leadership and Ethics Board, where we think a lot about what it means to lead with intention, especially within systems that have real human consequences. Last fall, I also participated in the Reentry Acceleration Program, also known as REAP, where I had the opportunity to engage more directly with issues tied to reentry and justice. Before REAP, I will be honest and say that my understanding of mass incarceration was fairly abstract. I was born and raised in Nigeria, and the incarceration system in Nigeria is very different from what we have here. So I really just understood mass incarceration in theory, and not in a way that felt immediate or personal. But that changed in 2024 when I attended a screening of Sing Sing here on campus as well. The film brought me face to face with the people behind the system and forced me to really confront the reality that these are not distant issues, but lived experiences. And it really did stay with me. That experience pushed me to seek out experiences like REAP and conversations like this one. And it is my hope that tonight's film does something for you or something similar for you, whether this is a space that you're already familiar with or one you're encountering more deeply for the first time. I have seen the film, and I will say that it can be intense at certain points, but I think that that difficulty is important, and I think that it matters because the reality it reflects is difficult, and it really does ask us to not look away. Before we begin, I'd like to invite Dominic. Hello, Dominic. Give a big hand for Dominic. Okay. Dominic is a research assistant at the Center for Justice at Columbia, and he will be joining us for a panel conversation after the screening. And he's just going to share brief notes about the nature of the content and what to expect. Dominic, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. First off, let me take this opportunity to thank every person who's in this room. I've had an opportunity to see the Alabama Solution, and this resonates with me in ways that is hard to put in context. I, much like the men that we will see in this documentary, have spent more than half of my life in prison. And what we're going to see today is just not happening in Alabama. It's happening all over the globe. So the reason why I'm up here today is to really just remind folks that what we're about to see is heavy and loaded, and it can and most likely will trigger you. So please be mindful of that. Take care of yourself. If you need an opportunity to step out, please do that, please. But that's really what I wanted to communicate to you, the importance of not only raising awareness about this issue, but balancing that perspective with taking care of yourself and just understanding that it was important that we have this conversation and raise awareness about that, but equally important that you understand how complex and how heavy this can be. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you so much for what's happening in this room today. And I'm super excited about this discussion and what will follow next.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I know you guys, the movie just wrapped up. And if you're like me, it's going to take a while to fully digest and let all of that sink in. I would say it's been a while since I've seen it, but I'm still processing it. And want to say, first of all, thank you for coming to this. It's a unique opportunity not only to see it, but to be in a room. When I first saw this, I saw it by myself, and I really wish I was with others to sort of discuss and and debrief and from that. So this is a great opportunity. Now, I wanted to just introduce you guys to the panel, and then I'm going to get out of the way for a great discussion. I just want to start with the moderator. Uh, Geraldine Downey is a professor in psychology, and um, she's at least, as far as I'm concerned, she is the anchor for all things around the understanding criminal justice reform at Columbia. Columbia is, in my mind, the number one university that investigates and really tries to make a big difference in this area. And Geraldine is the anchor for all of that, and she has been for a while. Um, I know you guys heard about REAP. Some of you guys know about REAP. REAP wouldn't be in existence without the work that Geraldine has done. So, well, as a moderator, you'll be in extraordinarily capable hands there. Um, just quickly, she's going to be joining and may further the introductions of the other panelists. We have Clara Brooks, who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting in person, but you saw her brother was featured in the film. So Melvin Bennu Ray. She's also the board member of the Free Alabama movement, which I'm sure she will share more about. There's Dominic Dupont, who is a research assistant working with Geraldine Downey in the Center for Justice, Columbia, the anchor body, and then Alex Duran, who is a co-producer of the Alabama Solution. So I'm pleased to take this time to a real round of applause. I want to thank them for joining us here. It's I really appreciate it. And like I said, this is a special time to allow us to understand and think through this film together. So I'll hand it over to you, Geraldine. As always, it is a blessing to see you.
Damon, Kathy Phillips were amongst the first people to say yes to us when we went around. Is it? When we went around and asked our colleagues at Columbia to come on board with the work that we do. And I'm not the only anchor here. Greer is another anchor. Mia is an anchor. Dario is an anchor. Claudia is an anchor. So we work together really on this question inspired by Kathy Bodine and Cheryl Wilkins, this question of what can universities do to end mass incarceration. And this is one of the things that we can do. We can learn about the horrors of mass incarceration and think together about what we can do to end it. And as somebody said, it's our money, taxpayers' money, that keep this system going. And so we need to think, even though we're not in Alabama, we're in New York State, about what we can do to get taxpayers' money into education systems rather than into incarceration systems. So before we start to go into the panel and the discussion, I actually want to do something that Clara inspired me to do, which is to get you all to clap very loudly so you can tell your brother when he calls you how much people appreciate it, okay. The documentary. So we talked a little bit beforehand about the question of that family members take on when they support their family members who are incarcerated, and that is what does it take for you to come on a panel, to watch this film over and over again, and see what's happening to your brother inside?
I mean, for me,
Why do you do it?
well, the reason I do it is because, I mean, for one, that's my brother, that's my baby brother. He is the third child, with my mom and my dad. So for us, we get involved because of him and because we see the conditions that these men and women go through on a daily basis. Whereas it took bravery and they had to be courageous in order to put themselves out there. One of the questions I had the other night on the other panel was, what can we, what is it that we can do, or what is there anything else that they're trying to do? My response was, they done did everything at this point. They put themselves out there. They gave you this film. They gave you the insight of what's going on. Now the responsibility bears on our shoulders now. What are we going to do? We look at this film and it evoked a lot of emotions from us. So it's taking that passion and turning that into an action at this point. But the only way that we can do that is that we come together, because it's going to take all of us, not some of us, but all of us, because we are affected in one way or the other. Me and Melvin was having this conversation the other night of organizing and mobilizing and trying to get involved. And one of the things I explained to him, he's saying they need to come and get the men on the inside to want to get involved. And I told him when I look at it, I think it is going to take the family members on the outside to convey this message to their loved ones on the inside, especially after they see this film, because a lot of people never believe their stories. And, in society as a whole, we have the stigma attached to people who's doing reentry, whether it's job placement or just we don't understand the trauma. And this film right here is enlightening us and explaining the trauma and showing us why, when they come home, there is so much trauma behind them. And now we see why they may act or move the way that they do. So for us, as a family, we had to get involved because my brother was so involved starting back in 2012 when he first thought of Free Alabama movement. And from that moment, as a family, we what happened is when men goes in there, they have a name for people who don't have family members that's, they can communicate with or involved with them. They call them throwaways. And when the incarceration men and women realize that these men are throwaways, they take advantage of them versus the ones that have family members that have visits, that write letters. So when they know that there's a family involved, they're very careful on how they act with them. But my brother started all of this because at the same time, my son was incarcerated. And because he watched my son go through what he went through, that's what made him start Free Alabama Movement and getting involved. So for that reason, I had two reasons, my brother and my son, to make sure that I stayed involved, making the phone calls, making sure they okay. So I didn't have a choice to answer your question. There was no other option for me or my family.
But you stepped up to the plate.
I had to because he had two little kids at the time when he went in. So, and the things that they dealt with. So, as a family, we took on that role for his kids and we just kept fighting and still fighting to this day as a family.
So, Dominic, I'm going to turn to you and ask you the question of, having spent so much of your life inside, what do you think gave the men inside the courage to do what they did, but also what enabled them to mobilize together and unify and make a decision not to act violently, even though that might have been their first impulse, as it would be anybody's first impulse in the face of the brutality.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Professor Downey. I think what caused the men to not be violent is they understand that violence begets violence. And the only thing that happens in a situation like that is we magnify this message that this type of conduct is acceptable. And we reaffirm that message to correction folks and people in the community that, and you saw this a lot throughout the documentary, the justification for beating a man to death was he had a weapon and he was being violent. And I think that for folks who've been incarcerated, you understand that that type of message only reinforces this idea of what state violence, it sanctions state violence. And those who have been incarcerated understand that that doesn't help the situation. To the other aspect of your question, what would make them choose to be on a unified front and to raise more awareness with regard to the work stoppage and how do we sort of like work together? I think you saw, and everyone in this room saw, that when someone is willing to participate in not eating, there's a level of commitment that almost escapes language. When someone says, you know, we'll be deprived food and we will not strike out violently because we understand that it's important to raise awareness around these type of things, is a different level of insight and commitment. And for anyone who's been in a cage and is trying to prevent insanity from creeping in on you, you understand that the only way to be effective in these type of approaches is to be committed to work together. And if you start to be violent, the only thing that's going to happen is people being isolated, people being beat to death, and people going through more of the same thing that we've seen happen, not just in Alabama, but across the United States.
And so one of the other themes in this was the political response and the way in which initially the Department of Justice was enlisted to right or wrong, to be a better kind of justice, or to provide a better type of justice, and that hasn't happened. And then the state of Alabama reacting against the need to the obvious in dehumanization, dehumanized um, actions that were going on in the prison. In the sense, why do you think? And you're from Alabama, so I'll put the responsibility on you to speak for the state of Alabama. Why do you think they acted like that? And your question is, would New York State do the same? So you go first.
So for me, I'm sorry. For me, you know, I lived here for over 25 years. I done lived in Georgia, I done lived in Ohio, and I done lived in Texas, and also, brought up in Alabama and Ohio. I don't think it's an isolation just in Alabama. I think the difference between Alabama and other states, they don't mind being truthful with their decisions. And they don't have a problem of saying, in the film, can't no one come down here and tell us what to do or how to run Alabama? That's what makes, Kinetic said it best, they're very arrogant in that sense. That's what makes Alabama different when it comes to political and taking a stance. Whereas, it's the Bible Belt. They live, everything decisions, and that, when they get in that political arena, they feel like everything decision they're making is based on their faith. Whereas it's the opposite, when Steve Marshall said, there's evil people and not taking accountability for the decisions they're making is just as evil. And so therefore, those are the things I think with Alabama that makes them a little different than other states. They don't see anything wrong with the decisions they're making, you know. it's the way. You heard the gentleman at the committee oversight committee meeting where he said if it was up to him, they will, execute everyone. And he was a judge.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, if that's a judge making that statement publicly, why aren't we going to look at every cases that he have presided over? Because in that sense, how were you sentencing people? Was it fairly? We know they do over sentencing, but there needs to be a hard look at a lot of um, people there, in the positions that they hold.
Thank you. To your question very specifically, would New York engage in the same type of conduct? And I want to remind us of Attica. Recently, reports have come out just a few years ago that there were people that were murdered for no reason. I want to remind you of a more recent case of a gentleman named Robert Brooks. And this reminds me a man who is beaten to death in a clinic prison in the presence of 14 other human beings. So the answer very specifically and very directly is this is not just an Alabama problem. This just happened in New York. Not that long ago, there have been people who have been acquitted of those crimes, and there have been some convictions. We have a lot more work to do. In my humble opinion, the type of things that we have bear witness to on body cameras that highlight state violence at the highest levels is deplorable and disgusting. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done across the nation.
Thank you. So I do want us to have time for questions, but I want each of you to say, what do you think should be the next steps that people take to change the system into one that's more just?
I think in order for change to take place, we do have to come together and fight together. There, you've seen what they was able to accomplish in that behind those bars, the three of them. And just imagine what we can do if we come together and put that same effort towards, making changes. Because we can't expect this film to do the work for us. We have to do the actual action. The film is an opportunity to use as a teaching moment to different organizations, legislator, um, different office, the churches. Everyone needs to be involved at this point because this is affecting all of us. Because remember, these men are coming out in trauma and they're coming out into society. In Alabama, there's no halfway house. When they're released, they're released. So there's no outlet for them or no steps for them to, get a handle on how to come out and navigate through society. So it's up to us to come together, mobilize, organize, and fight this system together because it's going to take all of us to do so. Otherwise, it's just another film that is going to go down in history that, is a good film, but let's not let their voices just be in vain.
Yeah, what I would say is we have to create new systems and we have to dismantle illegitimate systems. And I think that that's going to take a lot of work because we don't have a system in place that provides support at scale, and we definitely don't have them in carceral settings. So I think that's the best approach. We have to work on dismantling this system that allows this type of harm to happen and create new systems that encourage more restorative practices and help folks identify the human in me, seeing the human in you. And I really think that's what has to happen.
Thank you. So, any questions? Yes. So you, if you, I don't know how we're going to do this, but you can shout. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us and for displaying this film. One thing that really stood out to me is the topic of human rights. I think when you think about the lack of access to water, to food, to inhumane treatment, the forced labor, all of these things are basic human rights. And these are things that are defended on the international scale. And I feel like we do a huge disservice to ourselves by trying to get domestic solutions, trying to get Alabama solutions, things that are done domestically by the very same people who benefit from these things. And so I was just wondering, like, do you all consider like going to the United Nations, or is this something that like you all take like legitimately of like looking at an international human rights standpoint to try to defend these cases, to try to get justice for these individuals who are victims to these issues, or is that just like another colonial system that like we're expanding, and especially with Dominic's question on like new solutions? I feel like the solution is there. The solution is that we have to look at this as a human rights issue and not just as a Alabama issue, or not just a New York issue or a United States issue, but as an international humanitarian issue. And so I was just curious about that perspective and whatever you all had to add to that. But thank you so much.
I mean, it's ironic you say that because I just was thinking as I was watching this film for the 200th time, and I was just thinking of the UN, and because I was thinking like we have to explore every avenue, whereas we can't not look at every opportunity or look at different places we can go with these issues. And no, it's not just an Alabama issue, but we also have to, as he mentioned, the system was created and built to operate the way that it is operating. So you have to think about hundreds of years of this system, was created because of slavery ended. So those are the things that, we have to. I'm sorry? Yes. We have to, we first got to understand and we got to educate, because the one thing that I'm finding is a lot of people have not seen this film, and a lot of family members are not still aware of the conditions that's going in. And in order to get the movement going, we all can come together, organizations, but we have to get the family members involved as well, because the mothers and the fathers, presence can be very impactful, when you're dealing with these type of issues. But we have to, I cannot express that enough, that we just have to come together and really get the families involved, because that was one of the things when the shutdown, the work strike happened, was a lot of families on the outside was not involved. They was not aware, a lot of people, a lot of them was upset. That's why it was, ended within 16 days, because um, the system is so, people are so institutionalized in there where they don't understand what's going on. They just don't get how to fight, why are we fighting, and it was just education.
So, Dom,
Yeah,
human rights approach would be helpful, or going to the international?
yeah. I think we have a lot of problems internationally as well. I mean, if you just turn on the TV, you'll see like this, folks taking a break while other folks aren't working, while, who are working and not being paid. We have things going on in globally that I think we need to like address at scale. I think we need to take a look at approaches that get away from whitewashing and look at something new and fresh and be bold in ways that would continue to raise awareness and be aggressive. I'm positive that we can fix these problems if we really wanted to. My humble opinion is there are a lot of folks involved here, and there are effective ways to look at new ways to address things, and I just don't think that folks are that interested, and it could be for a lot of different reasons. So we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to be respectful of the time.
I actually agree with you. I mean, I'm from Ireland, so I understand more of the international human rights perspective. And I think that that's a perspective that's very useful. And I think Greer, if she was up here on the panel, could also be talking about the way in which our colleagues at the Centre for Justice are bringing an international perspective and having a sort of a solidarity movement around the world on this. But that's for another night. So somebody had their hand. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer that the international aspect has always been there because there was a great deal of fight to free the Angola Three. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Angola Three, who are the 3 Black Panthers who were in solitary confinement for more than 4 decades. All of them have deceased since then. But I just wanted to share personal testimony. From Uganda, first of all. And after I finished my MBA several decades ago, I went to work in Nebraska. And I just happened to have a co-worker whose niece was going to Lincoln Penitentiary to see her brother. Her brother had been involved in a brawl in a bar. A young white man attacked this young man who was black, and so there were punches thrown, and so the black guy knocks out the white guy, and the black guy ends up in jail, pending whatever goes on legally. So he was there when I went to visit him together with my co-worker's niece. And so that got me on a path to volunteering at the Lincoln Penitentiary. And honestly, this is 3 decades ago, and I was fairly new to the US, fairly new to Nebraska. Nebraska is much like this 30 years ago. And the jails then, at the time that I was there, 3% of the population in Nebraska was black. But, Omaha, Nebraska, where I worked, had a sizable black population. So it's not like most people think there are no black people in some areas of New York. We were a sizable group in Nebraska. However, at the Lincoln Penitentiary, I would say maybe 96% of the population, a huge complex, was black men. And for me, coming from Africa, I was utterly, that to me became my love for the US and sort of the underbelly from which I have assessed my life in the US. But I'd also like to really also share the fact that I've lived now for several decades in New York, here right here in Harlem. And I would really like to say how happy I am to look around this room and see this being addressed, not very far from us. Rutgers Island, under Mamdani, has already lost 2 people, within the past week. Prior to that, under Eric Adams, almost 20 people died at Rutgers Island. There's been nothing done about it. In Harlem, where I live, for about 2 decades, young men have been locked up for smoking reef. I went to school over here at Teachers College not too long ago, and people would come out of their dorm rooms or in parties smoking reef. I didn't see anybody arresting anybody there. That's more than a decade ago when I was here. So I at the same time also really want to challenge people who live in these institutions. You don't live very far from projects where young men's lives have been shattered for decades, their fathers shattered for decades. To see these films is great. To discuss them and have a panel discussion is great. But and then to start theorizing what it is we could do, we need to sometimes just come up with what action can we here collectively take. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. We have maybe 2 more questions. Sorry, go ahead.
So my name is Francisco, and I just want to tell the sister I commend you for supporting your brother, because I know how important is that. I'm just a returning citizen. I just came back to society after 30 years on incarceration. So your work, it means a lot for the people inside, because we don't have the voice. You guys have the voice. But one thing that I can tell you, the brother mentioned how we dismantle this system with the money. We go to legislation. Legislation is the one that write the law. They're the one that give money to this institution to run these prisons. So if you think about it, how much they invest in the rehabilitation out of the whole budget that they have, only a small percent. With the state that I come from, only 3%. 85% go to the pay of the officers. Think about how outrageous is that. 2% to have the person rehabilitated. In my case, I was a youth offender. That was the only reason I'm back in society. I was sentenced to death. That's what I was sentenced. But because the law changed, he gave me a second chance. So I came back with society with a different mindset to contribute to society, to change mentality, and to bring awareness of the injustice that's happening there. Because one thing is that the experience that people of colors experience inside the prisons is much different than other experience. Right. It's much harder for us to fight to get out. So I just want to say that. And one last thing that I want to mention, that story, the part where the person was pronounced dead in the hospital, that happened often because they don't want to report that the person died in the prison, because that bring the heat, that bring problem to the prison investigation. So most often they die in the room to the hospital, and that happened everywhere. With that, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I too, justice impacted. Luckily for me, I've been out now some 3 years, since 2023. I was active, highly active in the prison system in New York State during my incarceration. Several brothers who are very much aware of who I am in our prisons. And there is a direct link, right, with incarceration and the capitalistic system. This is all about money. And in my efforts to bring about some form of justice and light to the issues that were occurring during my course of incarceration, I sought that it is very necessary that we forcibly engage our politicians, right? Because the governor was the only politician outside of the attorney general that they were talking to, right? In 2000, I was in Attica. In 30 days, police officers killed 2 prisoners within the facility, right? And the gentleman who was in charge of media was Peter something. I think it was Peter Falk, but don't quote me on the last name. And within 24 hours, he put out a spin as to why those people were killed. And it always had to do with them purporting some type of violence and failing to listen to police, to correction officers' orders, right? This is a systematic thing. They have this apparatus in place, right? And so I did several things. I began to teach the prisoners, fellows who were incarcerated with me, right, how to write, to get their voice out beyond the wall, to engage their families, right? In '84, we held a non-violent protest in Elmira, and we wrote to newspapers, had the newspapers on board, had our families on board, had politicians on board. So the day that we ended up doing the protest, everybody was calling the facility and making inquiry. There's a process that one has to take that fully wasn't engaged in these brothers' efforts, and that's because this is something new for them, right? And they were so dispersed. But when we want to attack this system, it's a multifaceted attack, right? And it requires engagement on different levels to become successful. I just want to say
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I want to thank you guys for this opportunity for me to be here and speak on behalf of my brother Melvin, Raul, and Kinetic. I think, as we were speaking, I think we have to have the conversation, and within that conversation, we have to have some type of resolution. And what is the end game? Because what is prison reform to me may not be the same thing to you. So we have to have those conversations. One of the things I think about all the time is boycott. We're quick to do it, to designers and different entities like that. But also we have to look at these companies that is using these men for free, and men and women for free labor. We need to start looking at those organizations as well and start holding them to the fire just as well as we do it when we don't like something that, these other companies are doing out here. So, with that, again, I'd like to say thank you. And I hope, you guys take from this film is taking it and showing it to everyone that you come in contact with, and sharing this film, and and find your organization. If you don't find one that you like, start up your own. But let's work together and get this message out here, and let's start fighting for change for the men and women that's behind these bars. Thank you.
Thank you.